Have you ever had one of those neighbors? The kind you know everything about, without ever really knowing them at all? For me, that was the guy in 3B. The apartment directly across the courtyard from mine. Our buildings were old, a U-shape of brick and glass, and my living room window offered a perfect, unobstructed view into his. It started subtly, a flicker of light in my peripheral vision as I was heading to bed. The first time, I didn't think much of it. The second time, a night later, I glanced at the clock. Las 12:17 alto M. The third night, I was waiting. I sat on my couch, the city lights painting patterns on my wall, and watched. At precisely 2:17 a.m., the lamp on his end table, a simple thing with a beige shade, switched on. This became our unspoken routine. My insomnia is I'd be up, reading or just staring at the ceiling, and I'd feel a strange sort of comfort knowing I wasn't the only one awake in the dead of night. I started calling him the Night Listener, a character from a book I'd read. I imagined him as a writer, or maybe a musician, hit by a sudden jolt of inspiration in the wee hours. I'd see his silhouette pass by the window sometimes, a tall, thin shape against the warm glow. He never looked out, never seemed to notice me watching. We were just two solitary souls, sharing the silent, heavy hours before dawn. This went on for months, every single night, without fail. 2:17 a.m. click. The light would come on. It was as reliable as the moon. I grew so used to it that on the rare nights, I actually slept through. I'd wake up with a strange feeling of having missed something important, like an appointment. Then, I had to go away for a work conference, a whole week in a different city, a different time zone. It was a strange break from my routine. The first night in my sterile hotel room, I found myself wide awake at what would have been just after 2 a.m. Back home, I almost laughed, thinking about the Night Listener. I wondered if his lamp was on, if he was up, staring into the darkness like I was. The week passed in a blur of meetings and forced small talk. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted and craving the familiarity of my own space. I dropped my bags, made a cup of tea, and sank onto my couch. It was late, well past midnight. As I sat there, sipping my tea and letting the travel stress melt away, my eyes drifted across the courtyard to apartment 3B. It was dark. I waited. Old habits die hard, I guess. I watched the minutes on my phone tick by. Las 12:15, las 12:16. My heart was actually thumping a little. It was silly, but I felt like I was waiting for a friend. And then, at 2:17 a.m., on the dot, click. The lamp came on. A warm, familiar glow filled the window across the way. A little smile touched my lips. He was still here, my fellow insomniac. All was right with the world. I felt a wave of relief wash over me and finally went to bed, sleeping more soundly than I had all week. The next day, I was grabbing my mail when I ran into my landlord, Mr. Henderson, in the lobby. He was a chatty, older guy who always seemed to know everything about everyone in the building. "Welcome back," he said cheerfully. "How was your trip?" We made small talk for a minute, and then, on a whim, I decided to ask. "Hey, Mr. Henderson," I started, trying to sound casual. "The guy in 3B, the tall, thin fellow. Is he a writer or something? I always see his light on super late at night." Mr. Henderson's friendly expression froze. He blinked at me, a look of genuine confusion on his face. He adjusted his glasses and peered at me. 3B. "Son, what are you talking about? No one's lived in 3B for almost a year." The mail in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. The air in the lobby turned cold. "What? No, that can't be right," I stammered. "I see his light on every single night. I saw it just last night, and the silhouette." He shook his head slowly, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "The last tenant was an elderly woman, Mrs. Gable. She passed away last winter. We cleared the apartment out months ago. It's been completely empty ever since. All the furniture's gone. Utilities are off. We're renovating it next month." My blood ran cold. "But the light," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Every night. At 2:17. Mr. Henderson just gave me a long, pitying look. The kind you give someone who's maybe a little overworked, a little stressed out. Maybe you're just tired from your trip. He sighed gently, patting my shoulder. There's nothing in there but dust. Kid, trust me. He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the lobby. My mind was reeling. Empty. Utilities off. It was impossible. Primera A, in Italiano. I saw it every night. I saw it while I was 1,000 miles away. How? That night, I couldn't bring myself to sit on the couch. I hid in my bedroom, my back against the door, as if that could stop the time from coming, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at my phone. Las 2:15. Las 2:16. I held my breath. My room was pitch black, but I could feel it. I could feel the moment it happened. Las 2:17. I didn't need to look. I knew that across the courtyard, in an apartment that was supposed to be dark and empty, a single lamp had just turned on. Who was the night listener? Or maybe the better question was, what was it? For the first time, I wasn't comforted by the light. I was terrified, because I realized he wasn't my fellow insomniac. He wasn't a writer or a musician. He was something else entirely. And I finally understood. The light wasn't for him. All those nights, I thought I was watching him. But maybe, just maybe, he was watching me back. The night listener wasn't just his name. It was his job. He was listening. To the building. To the silence. To me. I moved out a week later. I couldn't stand another night in that apartment. Another 2:17. I never looked back, but sometimes, when I can't sleep, I find myself staring out the window into the darkness. And I wonder, if I look long enough, will I see a faint, distant light switch on, just for me. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time. Have you ever had a neighbor who was just a little too friendly? You know the type. Always smiling, always stopping by for a chat, and always asking for something. For me, that neighbor was Mrs. Alara. She lived in the house directly across the street. A quaint little cottage with a garden that was always perfectly manicured, no matter the season. Her house was like something out of a storybook. But Mrs. Ilara herself, she was a story of a different kind. She moved in about a year ago. I remember the day clearly. A small moving truck, just a few boxers, and then there she was, standing on her porch, waving at me with a smile that was a little too wide, a little too bright. I waved back, being neighborly. The next day, there was a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Alera, holding an empty measuring cup. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, her voice like wind chimes. I seemed to have run out of sugar. "Would you mind terribly if I borrowed just a cup? I'm in the middle of baking a welcome cake for myself." I chuckled at that. A welcome cake for herself. It was quirky, endearing even. Of course, I gave her the sugar. Who wouldn't? But then it happened again. A week later, another knock, another empty cup, another smile that stretched just a bit too far. "So, sorry to bother you again, dear. You won't believe it, but I've run out of sugar once more. I have such a sweet tooth, you see." I obliged, of course. It was just sugar. But the pattern continued. Every week, like clockwork. The knock, the cup, the smile. Sometimes she'd have a different excuse. Baking for a friend, making hummingbird nectar, trying a new caramel recipe, but it was always sugar. Always. It started to feel strange. I mean, how much sugar can one person go through? I'd see her coming and going, but never with grocery bags. Her car, a vintage Beetle, never seemed to leave its spot in the driveway. The garden was always perfect, but I never saw her tending to it. The only time I ever saw her was when she was on my doorstep, asking for sugar. My friends thought it was hilarious. They'd joke about it. "The sugar bandit strikes again," they'd say. But for me, a tiny seed of unease had been planted, and it was starting to grow. I began watching her house from my window. I know, it sounds creepy, but I couldn't help it. Her lights were always on, at all hours of the night. Faint, flickering lights, like candlelight, but I never saw her silhouette. never saw any movement inside. It was just an illuminated, still life painting of a house. The weekly visits continued. The requests for sugar never stopped. And with each visit, my own supply dwindled. I found myself buying extra bags of sugar, just for her. It became a line item on my grocery list. Milk, bread, eggs, and Mrs. Alera's sugar. The unease turned into a quiet, gnawing dread. Her smile, which I once found quirky, now seemed predatory. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, didn't seem to blink. They just stared, fixed on me, as she held out that empty cup. I started making excuses. "Oh, I'm running low myself, Mrs. Alara." But she would just tilt her head, smile that unnerving smile, and say, "Oh, I'm sure you have just a little to spare, dear. Just a cup." And somehow, I would always find myself back in my pantry, scooping sugar into her cup, my hand trembling slightly. It was like I couldn't say no. Like her request wasn't really a question. One day, the inevitable happened. I was baking myself, for a change, and reached for the sugar canister. It was empty. Completely empty. I had forgotten to buy more on my last trip to the store. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a pang of anxiety. What would I do when she knocked? And right on cue, there it was. The familiar, rhythmic knock on my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath and opened it. There she was. Mrs. Alara, the empty cup in her hand, the smile plastered on her face. "Hello, dear?" she chimed. "You know what I'm here for?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Alera," I stammered, holding up my own empty canister as proof. I'm completely out. I forgot to buy more. For the first time since I'd met her, her smile faltered. It didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became something else. Something cold. She tilted her head to the side, her pale eyes narrowing just a fraction. A long, silent moment passed between us. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken things. Then she spoke, her voice no longer like wind chimes, but like the scraping of dry leaves on pavement. "That's strange," she said, her voice a low whisper. "That's very strange." She looked from my empty canister to my face, and her smile returned. But this time it was all teeth, because I stopped needing sugar years ago. My blood ran cold. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy like shards of glass. Years ago. What did she mean? Before I could form a question, before I could even process the chilling implications of her statement, she turned around. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked away, her back ramrod straight, and disappeared into her perfect storybook house. I stood in my doorway, frozen, clutching my empty sugar canister. She never knocked on my door again. The weekly visit stopped. I should have been relieved. I was, at first. The constant dread, the anxiety, it all faded. Life returned to normal. I bought sugar again, for my own use. The canister on my counter was always full. I tried to forget about Mrs. Alara and her bizarre request. I told myself it was just a strange old lady playing a weird prank. I tried to rationalize it, to explain it away, but I couldn't. Because that's when the new thing started. It began about a week after our last conversation. I was in bed, drifting off to sleep, when I heard it. A faint sound from downstairs, a soft, scraping noise. My kitchen. I froze, listening. It was the sound of my pantry door creaking open. Then, another sound, the metallic scrape of a lid being lifted off a canister, my sugar canister. I told myself it was the house settling. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself I was imagining things, my mind playing tricks on me after the whole ordeal with Mrs. Alara. But it happened again the next night. And the night after that, every single night, like clockwork. The creak of the pantry door, the scrape of the canister lid. Sometimes I think I can hear a faint whisper, too quiet to make out the words, but it sounds like dry leaves rustling. I've checked the locks. I've installed a new deadbolt. I've even left a dusting of flour on the floor in the kitchen, hoping to catch footprints. But every morning, The flower is undisturbed. The locks are secure. The house is empty, but the sugar is always a little bit lower. Who speak up? I don't sleep much anymore. I lie awake in the dark, listening, waiting for the sound. The sound of my pantry door opening. I never see Mrs. Ilara anymore. Her house across the street remains perfectly still, the lights flickering in the windows like malevolent eyes. She never knocks on my door, but I know she still comes. She doesn't need to borrow sugar from me anymore. She just takes it. I don't know what she is, or what she wants with the sugar, but every night, as I lie here, listening to the sounds from my own kitchen, I can't help but think about her last words. I stopped needing sugar years ago. Maybe she doesn't need it, but something else does, and it's living in my house. Thanks for tuning in. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more dailies from the shadows. Stay safe, and maybe keep an eye on your sugar. You never know who might be borrowing it. My neighbor, let's call her Sarah, was the perfect neighbor. Quiet, kept to herself, and had this one peculiar, but kind of endearing, habit. Every single morning, like clockwork, she'd be at her window, waving as I left for work. I'd wave back, and that was our little ritual. It felt nice. A small, friendly connection, in a world that can often feel pretty isolating. But there was something else, something I noticed after a few weeks. Her taste in clothes was identical to mine. At first, I just thought it was a funny coincidence. One Monday, I wore my new red rain jacket. Pre-metal October, and there she was, waving in the exact same red jacket. Weird, right? But hey, it was a popular brand. The next day, I chose my favorite pair of limited edition sneakers. And you guessed it, so did she. It started to feel less like a coincidence and more like a game. A strange, unspoken game of who wore it better. I'd even started picking my outfits the night before, wondering if she'd somehow match me the next day. And she always did. I have to admit, part of me was flattered. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Isn't that what they say? Maybe she just really admired my style. I never mentioned it to her, of course. How would you even bring that up? Hey, nice jacket. I see you. Have one just like it. And the same shoes. And the same scarf. Every single day. It would have sounded crazy. Accusatory even. So, I just let it go on. Our silent, sartorial twinship continuing day after day. It was our little secret, or so I thought. The weirdness didn't escalate. It just stayed there. A constant, low-level hum of oddness in my daily routine. I'd leave my apartment, see her at her window, we'd wave, and our matching outfits would be a silent acknowledgement of our strange bond. It became so normal that I almost stopped thinking about it. Almost. There was still a tiny part of my brain that could unshake the feeling that something was off. It was like a puzzle with a missing piece, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it bothered me. I tried to get a better look at her. Her apartment was directly across the courtyard from mine, so we had a clear view into each other's living rooms. But her curtains were always drawn just enough to obscure the details. I could see her silhouette, her arm waving, the color of her clothes, but never her face clearly. She was just this friendly, well-dressed shadow. I even tried looking her up online once, but her name was common, and I had no idea what she did for a living or who her friends were. She was a complete enigma. The routine was so ingrained that I'd feel a pang of disappointment if I was running late and missed her. It was the constant in my morning. Wave, see the matching outfit, smile, and head to work. It was predictable. Safe. Until it wasn't. One particular Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was running incredibly late. I'd spilled coffee all over my shirt, had to change, and was now frantically searching for my keys. I finally found them, grabbed my bag, and rushed towards the door, completely forgetting about our morning ritual. I was already halfway down the hall when I remembered. I felt a weird sense of guilt, as if I'd broken a promise. I quickly turned back, unlocked my door, and rushed over to my window. I was expecting to see her waiting, maybe looking a little disappointed that I was late. But the window across the courtyard was empty. I felt a strange mix of relief and letdown. Maybe she had a life after all. Maybe she'd gotten tired of our game and had already left for her own day. I shrugged, a little sad that the streak was broken, and turned away from the window. And that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement. Not outside, but inside. Across the courtyard, in her apartment. The curtains were pulled back more than usual. I could see into her living room clearly for the first time. The furniture was sparse, almost identical to mine. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. There was someone standing by her window. Someone looking out. Someone waving. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. The person in her window was wearing my clothes from that morning, the blue blouse I'd de-spilled coffee on, and the gray trousers I'd changed into. They had my haircut, my posture. It was like looking into a mirror, a distorted, terrifying mirror. Then, the figure in the window slowly lowered its arm, and as it did, I saw my own front door, reflected in the glass of her window. My real front door, the one I had just come through. I watched, paralyzed, as the reflection of my front door opened. I saw a figure step out, a figure wearing my clothes. It turned, it looked up towards the window across the way, and it raised its hand. It waved. I was watching myself. I was standing in my living room, watching myself leave my apartment, watching myself wave at the window I was currently standing behind. But that was impossible. I was here. I was the one who was late. I was the one who had come back to wave. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the paradox unfolding before me. Who was that person leaving my apartment? And if that was me, then who, or what, was I? I looked down at my hands, at the clothes I was wearing. They felt real. I felt real. But the scene playing out across the courtyard was also real. The other me, who was on time, was now walking away, heading for work, completely oblivious. And then the most chilling thing of all happened. The figure in my neighbor's window, the one that looked just like me, the one that I now realized I was inhabiting, slowly turned its head away from the window. It turned to face the dim interior of the apartment. And I finally saw her. My neighbor, Sarah. She was standing in the corner of the room, holding a red rain jacket, my red rain jacket. She smiled, a thin, knowing smile. And then she held the jacket out for me, as if offering it. It was then that I understood. This wasn't her game. It was mine, and I was just the newest player. I hadn't been watching a copy of myself. She had found the perfect match, and now, so had I. The morning ritual would continue. It had to. Except tomorrow, I wouldn't be the one leaving. I would be the one at the window, waiting, waving, wearing someone else's clothes. I've been losing my mind. For the past 3 weeks, every single night, without fail, the noise starts. It's always the same. Footsteps. A slow, relentless pacing from the apartment next door. Unit 4B. It begins just after midnight and doesn't stop until the sun starts to rise. Thump. 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 Back and forth. Back and forth. It's the kind of sound that gets under your skin and into your bones. At first, I tried to ignore it. I put in earplugs, turned on a white noise machine, even tried sleeping with pillows over my head. But nothing worked. The sound seemed to vibrate through the very walls of my apartment, a constant, maddening rhythm that made sleep impossible. After the first week, I was a wreck. My work was suffering. I was irritable, and I started seeing shadows in the corners of my eyes. I was living on coffee and sheer desperation. I tried knocking on their door one afternoon. I stood there, listening. Nothing. Just silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. It was like no one was even there. But I knew someone was. I could hear them every night. So I started leaving notes. Polite ones at first. Hey neighbor, could you please keep it down after midnight? The walls are pretty thin. I'd slide them under the door to 4B. The next morning, the notes would be gone, but the pacing would continue, maybe even a little louder than before. My politeness quickly evaporated. The notes got more aggressive. Seriously, what is your problem? People need to sleep. And finally, just a single, desperate plea, written in thick black marker. Stop. Each time, the note would disappear, and each night, the pacing would return, a mocking metronome marking my descent into insanity. I even tried banging on the shared wall in the middle of the night. I'd slam my fist against the plaster, screaming, "Shut up! Just shut up!" For a brief moment, the footsteps would pause. My heart would leap with a sliver of hope. But then, after a few seconds of deafening silence, they would start again. Thump, thump, thump. It felt like they were taunting me. I started to get scared. Who was this person? Why would they pace all night, every night, ignoring all my pleas? I never saw anyone go in or out of 4B. The mail carrier never stopped at their door. It was as if the apartment was occupied by a ghost, a phantom whose only purpose was to torment me. The lack of sleep was making me paranoid. I started to wonder if I was imagining it. Was I the one going crazy? I even recorded the sound on my phone one night. I played it back the next morning, and there it was, faint but clear. The rhythmic thud of footsteps. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. That's when I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go to the building management. I was sleep-deprived, on edge, and probably looked like a madman, but I didn't care. I marched down to the leasing office, my phone clutched in my hand like evidence in a courtroom. The building manager, Mr. Henderson, was a kind, older man with a patient smile. He listened intently as I poured out my story, my voice cracking with exhaustion and frustration. I told him about the nightly pacing, the ignored notes, the banging on the wall. I even played him the recording. He listened, his brow furrowed with concern. He nodded, sympathetically. I understand. That sounds incredibly frustrating. Let me just pull up the records for Unit 4B. He turned to his computer and typed for a moment. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. This was it. Finally, something was going to be done. I imagined Mr. Henderson calling the tenant, issuing a formal warning, maybe even starting eviction proceedings. I just wanted it to stop. I needed it to stop. But as Mr. Henderson looked at the screen, his patient smile slowly faded. A strange expression crossed his face, a mix of confusion and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. He frowned, leaning closer to the monitor as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He clicked the mouse a few more times, scrolling through different pages. The silence in the office stretched on, thick and heavy. I could feel a cold dread creeping up my spine. "Is there a problem?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up from the computer, his eyes meeting mine. The friendly warmth was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling concern. "That's odd," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "According to our records, there's no one living in Unit 4B. My blood ran cold. "What? That's impossible," I stammered. "I hear them every night. I've been leaving notes. The notes are gone. In the morning." Mr. Henderson shook his head, his expression grim. "The last tenant moved out over 6 months ago. The unit has been completely empty since then. We haven't even shown it to anyone." My mind reeled. Empty. How could it be empty? The footsteps, the disappearing notes. It didn't make any sense. A wave of dizziness washed over me. Was I losing my mind after all? "No," I insisted, my voice trembling. "There's someone in there. I know it." Mr. Henderson sighed, looking at me with pity. "Listen," he said gently. "Sometimes in these old buildings, sounds can travel in strange ways. The acoustics are tricky." He paused, then asked a question that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Are you absolutely sure the footsteps aren't coming from the apartment?" Above you, a cold, heavy silence filled the room. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. The apartment above me. The question hung in the air, sinister and absurd. I felt a nervous, hollow laugh bubble up in my throat. I swallowed it down, my mouth suddenly dry as dust. I looked at Mr. Henderson, whose face was now a mask of dawning horror as he realized what he'd just asked, and what my answer had to be. I took a shaky breath, the words catching in my throat. "I live on the top floor. There is no apartment above me. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Let me know in the comments what you think is making the noise. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.